Hello, welcome to a very special episode of Back to the City. I'm Simon Calder, and this is Sarah Morris. Welcome, Sarah Morris.
Hi, Simon.
It's a special episode because, to begin with, you have a record release coming up at
Yes.
Ice House on Friday, May 5th. And that's for Here's to You, which is, I think, is it the fifth album of original songs?
Yes, that's what, it's not the fifth album, but it's the fifth album of original songs. Only Free, Ordinary Things, Hearts in Need of Repair, All Mine, Here's to You, and then there was a tiny EP.
Yep.
Between here
and
there. False,
It's
right?
between here and there.
Right. That's the 4.5.
Our most recent interview was when I was stuck in England.
Oh, yes?
And that was regarding Between Here and There. And it sparked a whole book. So the second reason why this is a special interview is that we are presently in one of the final chapters of the book, Her Hummingbird Heart. The title of my book, Her Hummingbird Heart, which is about harnessing creativity, references Good at Goodbye, which is a song by Sarah, where there's a character whose heart has always been a hummingbird. I'm sure we'll circle back to that at some point. But let's dive into this record, Here's to You. I think that there are three concepts that we'll find ourselves circling back to.
Okay.
And these are play.
Yeah.
Play is a word that is in the first verse of the song Here's to You. Truth,
Yeah.
which is a word that is in more than half of the songs.
Really?
Yes.
Good.
That's the key word, I think.
Yeah.
And we'll do a whistle-stop tour of all of the references to truth momentarily.
Yeah.
And then storytelling, which shows up 3 times. Beginning with play, there's a reference to play in the first verse of Here's to You. In that instance, it is a dress with a skirt that sways at your knees that plays in the early autumn breeze. There's this playfulness in this instance of the clothes and the breeze. I was reading the mostlyminnesota.com interview that just came out regarding the record, and you referenced feeling more into play in that, working with Dave Mealing. I love his music, the way he creates the sense of play, and sure, why not, is palpable. Play is one of the guideposts to wholehearted living, along with rest, according to Brené Brown. To begin with, before we move on to truth and story, what reflections do you have on play in relation to this new record?
Yeah, so I think I'm always aspirational, trying to incorporate more play in my life, absolutely. For All Mine, for instance, I definitely wrote down maintain a sense of play on a piece of paper before I went into the studio as a goal. So that's guided me in the studio in the past, and I hope it guides me every time, because I think that's so valuable. The practical nature of being an artist, an independent artist, who's hiring musicians and a studio time and putting, can put pressure on the time in the studio to be a certain thing. And so it's for me, I need that reminder, yes, you're there to work, but you're really there. You've got to maintain that sense of play.
One is paying people, presumably. Time is money.
Right.
And so on.
It's you can hold that somewhere in the Wayback Machine, but you need to know that your main goal, my heart goal is to play with these musicians, with this time, with the space. This was recorded not post-pandemic, but after we'd already journeyed through a fair amount of that. And so there was within me, as I think within a lot of us, just a desire to try some new things, take the lessons that we had, what we'd learned, what I've learned about myself in that time, and stretch out of my comfort zone a little bit. The bulk of the album was recorded in 3 days at Salon Sonic Studios, where the band and Dave Mealing came together. And the band was comprised of Andrew Foreman, Thomas Nordland, and Lars Larson, who've been, playing with me forever. Yes, exactly. And so it was a combination of my OGs, and also we were in a new space with a producer. So there were 2 distinctly different elements from our past experiences.
Because the past producer seemed almost like a band member, really.
We would always
working with him, and I remember
we always worked with Eric. We've always worked with Eric Bloomquist, who I love, to co-produce, and he would be the engineer, and he would mix them. and we worked at that studio. So he's absolutely, yeah, I would think of him as a band member for sure. And that space is like home to me.
Yeah.
And so one of the things with COVID times and the amount of time I stayed at home is like I realized I needed to spend some time in not homes, right? And so I think going to a different studio kind of touched on that. Like there's this German word that I learned at Tapetenwechsel, which is like you go out for a scenery change, and that was a bit of a good scenery change and introducing some elements. Holly Hansen engineered it, and Dave was like just enough different to force my brain to just think into different spaces. And so we did all the bass and the drums and most of the guitars, and a lot of the keys were that day. And a lot of the vocals, the lead vocals, post that week, those 3 days. I spent a lot of time going to Dave's house and singing in his attic. And so that is like many hours, but spread out over a year of me just singing oohs and ahs and words in his attic. And that's where I think that was my playground.
Yeah.
And
Dave's
that's,
attic was
yes.
Is that where some of the vocals were recorded?
The harmonies. We didn't do any lead vocals there, but a lot of the harmonies. Most of the backgrounds were recorded there. And then also Dave makes magic sounds. He does all kinds of things with all kinds of instruments, and he did that in his attic too. So, so I think there was like a lot of post-session play that was like I would go to his house. We would have a limited amount of time, and I never knew what we were going to do, and I was always invigorated by the time we spent. Like it was just such a fun. I've been a singer my whole life. I really loved doing a cappella work when I was in high school. I loved choral work, and this gave me a chance as an adult to refer to some of that time in a way that was like, wow, what's coming out here today? Like, what kind of nonsense do I want to throw on the canvas? And so that was really great.
What was the phrasing of the play intention again? The kind of maxim?
Maintain a sense of
Do you
play?
remember? Yes, exactly.
Okay.
What you wrote down, maintain. So you
Yes.
went in with that intention in each of these cases.
Yes, and I would like set, like, be with me today, let me go and serve this song, serve this moment. I do that kind of stuff.
Brené Brown, who's such an influence on both of us,
Absolutely.
Refers to digging deep. Digging deep involves getting deliberate, getting inspired, and then getting going. And she introduces that in The Gifts of Imperfection.
Yeah.
And then applies that at the end of each of the guidepost chapters.
Yes.
She gives guidance on how to dig deep with that particular guidepost.
remember
And I
that.
think this is an instance with the play and rest one.
Yeah.
With making sure that this commitment to playing as a guidepost to wholehearted living and a remedy to shame
Yeah.
and fear
Yeah.
is actually played out. What you were saying about harmonies reminded me of a past conversation that we had regarding the approach to harmonies on the Hearts in Need of Repair record, working with Eric. You were very intentional then. If there were harmonies, it would be like, why is there this other voice?
Yeah.
And in Cheap Perfume in particular, it was the conscience of the character in the song. That's why the harmony would come in. And it sounds like in this instance, with the play intention, maintain a sense of play, was the approach to harmonies the same or slightly different?
Yeah, yes. So on Hearts in Need of Repair, there definitely were guest harmonies as well, right? Carrie Arnett sang some beautiful harmonies, Matthew French, Zachary Schmidt. And most of the harmonies there would be harmony on a lyric, and that's why it was always so crucial that it be story-based, right? Like it needed for my brain to have a reason that it would be there. And Here's to You, absolutely still intentional. It needs a reason to be there, but the reason often was more of a sonic.
Yeah,
The thought there, I think, was the voice as an instrument.
totally.
So it was less story-driven and more sonically.
Yeah, expression beyond story.
Yep.
Which is interesting because in the book, Her Hummingbird Heart, I find myself reflecting, inspired by your example with your songwriting, on the significance of story, which is one of our other one of the other remaining key words, but then also the significance of song and the way in which music can break us out of the stories, the limiting stories that we tell ourselves. So that's really interesting to think how, in this instance, you're kind of letting music take the lead,
Yeah.
as opposed to having the story determine the parameters within which the harmonies are
Yeah,
constructed.
that's a good reflection because, I mean, story is still very important. And to me, in all the ways that it brought this song to completion before I brought it to the band, but definitely after that, I think, not that I ever forgot story, but that this sense of play overrode that.
Yeah. I was looking back at our, I think our first interview in the Sign Out Radio garage was in
Oh my gosh, yes,
2016.
that was the first one. And then we were at your house. We've been everywhere.
We've been everywhere, yes.
Yes.
Yep. This wasn't a Back to the City interview, but we were like in a meditation center.
Yes! That would have been a good episode.
Yeah, exactly. That gets a chapter in the book. But in our first interview back in 2016, reflecting on 2015's Ordinary Things, what you had to say about story back then and country music. Well, for a start, your husband kind of put you onto country music. And the Eagles and James Taylor, things I'd never listened to before. And I really fell hard for the music as well and the storytelling in country music. It's still my favorite type of songwriting. And in 2016, Simon says, what is it about the manner of storytelling in that genre that you like? And then you say, I think that they do a really beautiful job of painting a portrait and putting in all the details that are just there, but maybe you're not aware of. I love that. Before we zoom in on the moments in the record that reference story, story obviously remains key in the mostly Minnesota.com interview that you just did. You say there's no other genre besides country that honors words and story with the same level of adoration.
I still think that, I was, as you were going, I was like, I just said something like that to Anne, because I do think that's true.
In this interview.
Even though, country has changed the way it sounds so much, and this album is for sure the least country sounding thing to me that I've ever done.
It is, yes.
Yeah, but it's still so foundational for me in the way I think about songs and words and stories, and how every word in there better have a reason. It doesn't get to it doesn't make the final cut if it doesn't have a specific story reason.
Yes.
And I want to be able to say every line as if it's speech, I don't want anything to be ever so poetic that you're like, wow.
But as if you're addressing the daughter or husband or whomever it is that's addressed in the song.
And in Here's to You, when I first started thinking about it, the triangle of songs that kind of guided the rest of the songs that got to come and play with the album were this idea of, it was Here's to You and You and I and You Are Champagne on a Wednesday. And they're all three to me things that are very much like, I'm talking to you.
Yeah.
We are having this conversation. And so I wanted the album to feel, the songs anyways, to be like each one is a conversation between two people.
Intimate conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Brené Brown, of course, is very focused on vulnerability and intimacy, the obstacles, impediments to intimacy.
Of which there are many.
Which there are very many. And each of the 10 guideposts has a corresponding impediment.
Yeah.
So, for example, with laughter, song, and dance, which is a key one, the impediment is needing to be always in control. Even if we're in a context that invites dance, we're going to find ourselves being self-conscious and like, what if someone's looking at me? What if I'm dancing wrong? And this concern about being cool and in control can impede the being musical, letting oneself be musical, which is something that we talked about in our previous interview. You said about it sounding less country. Like in the one sheet, it says that Sarah Morris sheds some of the country swagger. So some of the country swagger has been shed. I like that word.
Yeah.
That was one of our prompt words
It sure
for
was.
the summer 2021
It was
songwriting
week
challenge.
3. I wrote it when I was driving that week.
And each of my songs that I wrote, when inspired by you, I participated in that round, and it wound up with the record hum as a result. Each of the songs that I wrote relates to one of the guideposts to wholehearted living and is an extension of the experiment, conducted in the book, bringing each of those guideposts into conversation with a song of yours, that I think is exploring that area and seeing when is there overlap, when does the song do what we would expect it to do if it's exploring that area according to Brene Brown, and when does something happen that the theory or the story about what wholehearted living is and what impediments there are to it, as told by Brene Brown, when is your music doing something that can't be fully explained by the theory or that kind of pushes beyond it?
Sure.
With that in mind, let's turn to the idea of story.
Okay.
If there's less country swagger, there's still as much country storytelling.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
And there are 3 references to story in your new records.
Champagne on a Wednesday.
Yeah,
It has one.
Yeah.
Come Back.
Yeah. 2 out of 3 so far.
Yes. You can tell me for time's sake.
Hello, my name is.
Oh, sure.
I thought of Hello, my name is when you were referencing the new German word that you like and the change of scene, and you referred to your brain. And I think neuroplasticity is very significant. You know, putting oneself in a different scene. It makes me think of Atomic Habits.
Yes.
Which you recommended to me, where you recommended the conversation between Brene and James Clear when we met at the meditation center. Well, before we jump into play, let's talk a little bit about neuroplasticity.
Okay.
And what's going on with freedom from the trappings of a name. Hello, my name is. Do you hear an invitation to maybe shed the skin that hides your deeper truth? That, of course, is one of the references to truth.
Yes.
Hello, my name is. Perhaps select a new one. Figure you'll grow into its opulence and shine. This really resonated for me because I'm putting the book out as Dr. Simon R. Calder.
Yeah.
And there's a character, Cephas, that I associate the songs that emerged with. And with some of the songs, I would take a part of myself and exaggerate it. And that was like this Cephas part.
Right.
And then the song could go somewhere that if it was just like Simon writing a song, it wouldn't have gone.
Yeah.
So could you reflect a bit on those lyrics in Hello, My Name Is, and the freedom that the song is kind of encouraging us to embrace by shedding things, including names?
Yeah. That song was such a wild write for me because I was shedding, like my guitar, for instance. It had to be on the piano. It was one of those things I couldn't figure out how to make it play on the guitar. And our prompt was badge. And where it hit in pandemic times was just like, oh, don't you just kind of want to get rid of all of it sometimes, you know? And I think that, I mean, I'm in my early to mid 40s and very aware of the roles I occupy, you know, how I relate to the people that I love.
Even the role of you love being a mum.
Yes, being a mother.
Said in a prior interview, you wanted to be a person with feelings as opposed to like the mum with feelings.
Yeah, right. And I think that's kind of where Hello, My Name. So Hello, My Name is very has a really personal story in there about how I actually got my name. And so, you know, I'm a daughter, I'm a wife, I'm a mother. Those things are never off they're never off for me.
Yeah,
but there are times where it's like, gosh, what would I be if I didn't like report to anybody? You know, I'm blessed to report to these people who I love. And still, I think about like what kind of wild, maybe I'd go to raves. Right. Who knows? Who knows? I don't know.
I've been going to raves.
But yeah, so I think that was Hello, My Name Is. The deal with my name, Sarah, is that my mom wanted to name me Justine. And she was a single mom. And in the delivery room, her coach was my grandmother. And by all accounts, my grandma was an awful coach, but we're glad she was there that day. And so when my mom, you know, pretty alone, was like, I'm going to call her Justine, my grandma was like, no, you should give her some name from the Bible. And while I can't imagine having decided on a kid's name and being like swayable, but my mom changed it to She went with Sarah, just like everybody else in the late 70s, early 80s.
Your grandma could sway her.
Right.
Makes me think of this.
Sway me.
Sway me, yeah.
It's very,
You could
it's
sway me.
interesting knowing my mom, knowing my grandma. Like, I actually should go back and ask my mom to say, like, how did it actually go past that? So there is this part of me, like, oh, I've always been a Sarah Elizabeth, no less, a very specific, like, being of my time. And I didn't know a lot of Justines growing up. Like, what is she like? Who knows?
Justine Morris.
Right.
Would she have country music?
Who knows? So I did name my electric guitar Justine. That's how I
So you
got.
did.
So I was able to, like, that's where Justine is now. But so I think there was, that when I saw the badge prompt, it was just thinking, like, the badges we wear, and also the sense of, as we started to go back into the world, and, like, I'd been to a conference for the first time, and you started to explore, like, oh, this is what it feels like to be surrounded by a bunch of people I don't really know. Now that I know all these things I didn't know before, like, do I want to handle myself more boldly, more gently? I get to choose more than I thought I ever did. Maybe that's the lesson.
After this pause and rest.
Yes, which wasn't very
more good.
restful, but like, because our nervous systems. I'm just reading Enchantment by Catherine May right now, which is so beautiful, and she talks like, our nervous systems were fully on alert, nonstop. Like, we were just always there. That's how it felt in my house with the pandemic. But the idea that all of that time meant that, okay, well, now when I go out in the world, I do have latitude to make decisions about who I am. It isn't all just decided for me, and it's not just decided for you. And that's hello, my name is.
Yeah. There's the capacity to choose and deliberate, and I think there's a lot of reflection on that throughout your songs, and Brené reflects on that too. Being able to give names to the emotional states that one is experiencing, and recognize when I'm kind of pushing away or being reactive, what emotion is present there, and then being able to course correct. Let's look at the 3 instances of story.
Okay.
Let's pick up that thread.
Yep.
In Come Back, there's an invitation to tell me all your stories. You knew that one of them was Champagne on a Wednesday. What's the reference to story there?
It's in the bridge. I've heard the stories you tell yourself.
Yeah. So that's a very significant phrase, again, from Brené.
Well, that's a Brené for
the story
sure.
that I'm telling myself.
Right,
It's from the Lake
it's
Travis.
her and Steve in the lake.
Yeah, exactly. Which the title track of my Hum record is the story of their encounter in the lake, and the genesis, therefore, of the rising strong process, because maybe we can quickly tell the story of Steve and Brené in the lake to clarify the significance of this phrase, the story that I'm telling myself.
I don't remember all the specifics. I know they're far in the water, so there's like that extra element of non-groundedness, and they're kind of having a squabble.
Yep.
And somewhere in that conversation, they realize like that they're totally missing the boat and interpreting the other person's motivations, and so they come to the story I'm telling myself is. So I'm taking the information, the data that I'm receiving from your body and your words, and telling myself this story, and like realizing that it's actually not always that accurate.
Yeah, Brené kind of communicates to her husband, Steve, the story that I'm telling myself is that I'm wearing this swimsuit and you are not attracted to me, and you don't want to be with me anymore.
Yeah.
And that is the story in her mind. But the trick of being able to own it and kind of step back from it enough to be like, okay, the theme of truth, this isn't an entirely true story.
Right.
But let's be with it.
Yeah.
And then to offer to the trusted person, her husband, this vulnerability. I am catching myself in this moment of imperfectly narrating what's happening.
Right.
And I'm going to share that with you. And let's see whether we can revise this story.
Yes.
So the lyric in Hum is, now I know some of the stories that I tell myself aren't true.
Yeah.
And that's a key starting point, taking as a given that we all confabulate, we're all like conspiracy theorists.
Oh my gosh, yes.
The human brain
Yes.
constructs stories to try and make sense of things.
Yeah, we're meaning makers. I mean, that's
yes.
one of Brené's big things. And yeah, that's absolutely true. And I think most often, some of the stories are helpful, but a lot of
Yes.
them, especially in one-on-one relationships, can go awry.
Yeah, you recommended in our previous interview Bird by Bird to me. And Bird by Bird
I love your copy. I love that cover. It's very playful.
It is very playful, isn't it? Yeah, back to the theme of play.
Yep.
This has a massive impact on Rising Strong because the idea of the shitty first draft
Right.
that's introduced in by Anne Lamott just as a device to write becomes the centerpiece of the Rising Strong process for Brené,
Yeah.
where I am encouraged to compose a shitty first draft of the story that I'm telling myself, and then to dig into that and theme of truth to try and recognize where the blinkers are to make the story more complete,
Yeah.
to integrate data that is excluded from that original story. Given that the third part of our interview will be focused on truth,
Sure.
and the second part is on story,
Yeah.
I'm just interested in your reflections on story in relation to the three statements,
Yep.
which are in Come Back, tell me all your stories.
Yeah.
There's a kind of invitation to just like let the story flow.
Yeah.
Tell me all your stories.
Tell me
I'm
all
listening.
your stories, right?
All your stories. It's inclusive.
Yeah.
Nothing needs to be changed.
Yep.
And then the instance that we just had a look at, I've heard the stories you tell yourself, no wonder you're not sleeping well. Let me paint you something new, something closer to the truth. It makes me think of story stewardship, which is a key new term for Brené in Atlas of the Heart. And we have to avoid narrative takeover or narrative tap down.
Sure.
And then the third instance of story referencing is, again, in Hello, My Name Is. A rose is a rose is a rose. Everybody knows that doesn't come close to getting it right. A rose is a rose is a rose. The story goes, all subtlety lost. So there's this kind of stale story
Yeah.
where subtlety is lost.
Right.
It's not novelistic. It's not rich and expansive.
It's rote. I mean, that's
Yes.
like the thought is like sometimes we just get so accustomed to the same old that we forget
Yeah.
that we forget that we get to choose.